So let's talk about the new adaptation of Dune.
Which we both saw recently.
In a theater. Not on HBO Max to the go or go to the Prime or whatever. So before we talk about the movie, we'll mention that this is going to be a spoiler-filled review. But I want to talk about our background with Dune, like where we're coming at the movie from.
All right, I'll go first. I wrote the book. Sorry, you can go first.
Okay, so I've read the book maybe 20 times. It's one of my favorite books. As far as the rest of the series, I only ever read the second book, and I read it only once. So I definitely feel like the first one stands on its own. I have seen the David Lynch movie, but it was a long time ago. I remember thinking some of the effects were really cool. Some of the design work was really cool. But as a movie, it was terrible. And I hated the stupid screaming thing they did with their guns, which, of course, is not what happens in the book. And I much preferred the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries, although it has been a long time since I've seen that one, too. And as far as this director, the only other movie of his that I've seen was Arrival, which I did like a lot.
My first exposure was the David Lynch movie, which I only saw once. And then I did read the book. I read the first book probably only twice, but I did read past that maybe 3 or 4, maybe the rest of them, I don't know. I also feel like the first book is definitely the strongest. I never saw the miniseries. I saw Blade Runner. I also saw Arrival, which I also liked.
So I was looking forward to this movie.
Me too.
Going off of Arrival and knowing how big a fan the director was of the book. But at the same time, I wasn't really expecting too much.
Because when you have adaptations of popular things, it's so easy for them to just check all the boxes of dumb stuff that will get people into the theater. Because that's all they care about.
Yeah, trying to dumb things down and appeal to kind of a larger audience.
Yeah, the lowest common denominator approach.
Yeah, which I don't feel like they did that with this movie.
I agree. I was very happy about that.
Yeah, although I do have some complaints about the approach to a lot of things.
I'm sure you do. My biggest complaint was they never explained who Dune was. Was it that kid?
So we're not really going to go into the plot of the movie or the book, but I will say that probably my biggest problem with the movie is that there's very little plot to it. Technically, the events that happen are the same as the events in the book, but it's missing all the background to the characters and to the world and all the relationships between all the different organizations and stuff, which is what, to me, is what makes the book interesting, is all the political stuff going on behind the scenes. And they kind of bring up at the beginning of the movie that they're dealing with political conflicts, but the rest of the movie doesn't feel like that. There's so much focus on the action.
I will point out that if the first Blade Runner movie did not exist, then his Blade Runner movie would have felt very much the same way.
Okay. Yeah, this was definitely the kind of thing where if I hadn't read the book, I don't think I would have enjoyed the movie at all. I still would have liked the visuals, which I thought were the biggest strong point for the movie, and the design work, but I would not have cared about anything that was actually happening.
But then you have to wonder, where's the balance? Because if they went too far in the other direction, it would have been that lowest common denominator.
Yeah, there's a difference between exposition and exploration or discussion of things. I mean, the book never lays out all the different organizations and what all they're doing. You just get what you need for the scenes. And I feel like the movie could have done the same thing. My favorite scene in the book, which is not in the movie at all, is just a scene where they're all having dinner, sitting around a table, and you've got representatives from all these different organizations, and they're all kind of working against each other, and you've got Jessica with her Bene Gesserit training being able to kind of detect who's working for who and what everybody's real motivations are. And it's really interesting seeing all these different factions that all kind of have their own end goals and are sometimes working with certain other ones and sometimes against other ones.
So you say that, yet you don't like Star Trek with Troy doing exactly what you described when they're all sitting around at their meetings.
No, Troy...
I'm just...
No, I know. Troy isn't good at that. Troy is just like, oh, I sent something, but I don't know what it is. Yeah, how helpful, Troy. That just makes things more confusing than before you said anything.
And I mean, they even got a kid who's got special powers, Wesley. I don't understand how that's not your favorite show of all time. It's practically Dune in TV show format. Riker's got his big old sandworm.
No, but Star Trek is a good example when you have the Klingons or even just the relationship between the Federation and the Cardassians in that first Cardassian episode. That's the kind of stuff that the movie that the Dune movie needed that's in the book, but it's just completely absent.
Yeah, it's going more for atmosphere.
Yeah, which I did think really worked. I thought it was really good when it came to atmosphere and design, and
I agree.
a sense of alienness to everything I thought really worked.
I agree.
And the visuals were great, even given how much CGI was in the movie. This is a director that knows how to use CGI well.
Yes.
And we have very few of those. I don't know if I can even think of another one offhand.
Michael Bay.
Other than the one scene with the mouse, which, I mean, it's a lot harder to make living creatures look good when they're CGI.
That was also super up close, which made it much more apparent.
Yeah, a big part of what makes CGI look fake is when you have bad animation, when the characters don't feel like they have normal physical weight and they kind of move like cartoons.
Yeah, it's that over-exaggeration of movement.
Yeah, and I mean, in this movie, it's mostly vehicles and stuff like that, and they, I thought the ornithopters were really cool, and I'm really glad that they went with the wing flapping thing, which is the way they're described in the book, but I couldn't imagine how they were actually going to portray something like that. I thought they would do something different.
Well, I thought even in the book, the mechanics of that were not the best.
Yeah, I mean, the book purposely leaves a lot of things ambiguous, which I think works in its favor because it doesn't have to explain how everything works. You can kind of just imagine that it's somehow working.
Yeah, that's the benefit of a book and using your imagination as opposed to someone trying to CGI it for you.
Yeah, and I am a fan of hard sci-fi. I like it when things are explained and the science behind everything makes sense. Not like in Star Trek, for example.
I was going to say, you don't like Star Trek. That's so weird.
Yeah, Star Trek is the opposite of that. But Dune does it really well, where it feels like it makes sense in the world, and you don't need the explanations because the book is not about how their vehicles work. It's about the plots and everything. And again, a phrase that pops up in the book a lot is plots within plots within plots. That's what I wanted out of the movie. And with the cast that the movie had, which, I mean, you've got a lot of really good actors there, but they don't have anything to do. Half the movie, they're just standing there staring at some big spaceship. And then it cuts to the next scene, which is them staring at some big spaceship.
That's true.
Like, yeah, it was cool, but I saw it already. And I'm here for the characters and the story, and I didn't really get that.
So keep those shots, but intersperse with more plot.
Yeah. None of the characters in the movie, for me, felt like they had strong personalities, or like we felt connected to them, or cared about what happened to them, or like we even really understood what they were trying to do.
I think disconnect is a perfect word for how I felt watching it.
Yeah, and I get that it would be hard to incorporate all their inner thoughts and stuff the way the book does. And I mean, the David Lynch movie tried doing that by having them whisper their thoughts to where you could barely understand what they were saying. And I mean, that was an interesting approach, I guess. I mean, it's been a while since I saw the movie. I don't remember really if it worked or not. I think it probably didn't. And yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I have a solution for that, but they needed at least some more discussion scenes between characters, some more intimate scenes where they're just talking to each other instead of trying to cut to the next big visual spectacle. So that was disappointing.
Let's talk about the sound.
Okay.
Was there enough sound for you? I feel that seeing it in a theater with big old 9.6 surround sound coming out of the floors and the ceilings and whatever really had a bigger impact than if I had watched it at home.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not as big of a sound guy when it comes to movies because I feel like movies are primarily a visual medium. I think sound is a bigger thing in video games, for example. For me,
I'm going to disagree with. Yeah, I'm glad you tacked on for me because I disagree with you.
Yeah. It just I personally don't really care. I don't have a problem watching something on TV with the sound, even in mono. I really don't care.
Mono.
Yeah. I do not give a crap at all when it comes to that. It does not. I mean, having sound coming from different directions, it's like, is that going to pull me into the movie? No, I'm still staring at a screen that's in front of me. I don't know. It's not a VR experience.
It's not so much the different directions. I think it's also how it's presented. The weight of it is bigger.
Yeah, I don't know. I get that perspective. I just don't personally put any importance on that. It doesn't really matter to me.
That's interesting for being such a big movie guy.
Yeah.
So you're a fan of the silent era. You think we never should have gone past that.
Well, in some ways, yeah.
Those talkies are still just a fad.
Let's talk about the music.
Okay. I was thinking the whole time, man, this sounds like Hans Zimmer. And then it was Hans Zimmer.
And Hans Zimmer is the big composer right now, I think, for big movies.
Yeah.
And he's definitely super popular among mainstream audiences, or even non-mainstream audiences, I think.
You know you're popular when people know you by name as a film composer.
Yeah, that's usually something that nobody's even aware of.
Right. And because it was a desert planet, it had those same orchestrations and vocalizations that those kinds of movies usually do.
Yeah, which felt very generic and just kind of fill in the blank to me.
But when Hans Zimmer does it, he has to put in a bunch of, all that big stuff.
Yeah, which was, I mean, every single scene with a big spaceship or something, you had the same music. And it was like, here's the biggest thing you've ever seen. Here's something that's, you're going to remember till your dying day. And then the next scene is exactly the same thing again. And it just felt like a flat line through the whole movie like that.
I could see either him or Villeneuve saying, I need the sound to match the gravity of this visual I'm presenting, but for every scene.
Yeah, which, I mean, I guess you could argue that it did. And again, I don't think it was just a problem with the music. I think it was a problem with the fact that there were so many scenes like that were the same.
I agree.
And toward the end of the movie, when you get to the Fremen, and it starts sounding more like stereotypical tribal music sometimes, to me it started feeling like self-parody. You had the chanting and the drums and everything. And
I think it's more difficult to come up with something different that still feels like it fits because psychologically, that's what we expect. That's what we've been exposed to for so long.
Yeah, that's true. Given that this movie presents things in such an alien way a lot of the time, I would have thought going with something completely different would have worked.
Yeah, I agree. The alienness of it would be an escape clause to try something else.
Yeah, and I never thought the music was interesting at any point. It was always very just exactly what you expect, just kind of fade into the background. Even when it's big, it's still just exactly what you thought it was going to be before you heard it.
It appeals to our base senses of this is big and it rattles my chest and it's just so cool.
Yeah, which I think if you can say that the movie tries to appeal to the mainstream in one way, I think that's the way, is the music.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the cast. Like I said, I feel like they didn't have a lot to do because their characters didn't have a lot to do. They didn't really have a chance to showcase their acting skills.
That is true.
And again, a lot of them are really good actors in other things.
That is also true.
The one that stood out to me was Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho. Not for good reasons. I've come to the conclusion that I don't like him because every movie that I've seen him in, he plays the same character. And he definitely didn't fit this movie. He felt too much like just a normal guy.
I agree. And for everybody else doing those big stares out windows at planets or big ships and not saying anything and really deep in thought, and then he shows up and starts high-fiving everybody.
Yeah.
It would have been less jarring if at least somebody else was kind of like that.
Yeah, they could have at least had Paul feel a little bit more like a normal person. Maybe make him a little bit more relatable that way.
They tried, because with him and Duncan, like, he hugged him.
Yeah.
Or he was excited to see him, but it was for about 2 seconds.
Yeah.
I feel like he came from a more standard fare action movie, but was placed into this movie.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially his big fight at the end.
Yes, I wanted to talk about that. There were a couple of action scenes that were focused on him, because there was him escaping in the ornithopter with the guards just backing off after seeing him kill a couple of people, which I thought was kind of dumb. And then that big death scene of his, which reminded me of some other movie. I couldn't think of what it was.
Lord of the Rings, man. Boromir.
I haven't seen Lord of the Rings, so...
I know you haven't seen it, but that's the movie you're thinking of.
I haven't seen it.
But it's still the movie you're thinking of.
I mean, I thought of maybe Godzilla Final Wars, but I knew that wasn't it. There's definitely some other movie. But yeah, while that scene was going on, well, first of all, it was dumb. It was so over the top. He's killing all these people, and then he gets killed. And then when they turn away, he gets back up and pulls a sword out of his body that's, sticking right through, and then starts killing people again. And I was just rolling my eyes. It's like, oh, look at this big badass moments. And it's like, no, this is dumb.
That was a point where I thought, I know this movie's so long, and I could probably go to the bathroom here and be okay.
Yeah. And that scene in the book is literally one paragraph where they glimpse through a door and see that he's fighting people, and that's it. And then they close the door and they run away. I thought the sword fights in general were not great. I really liked the shields. I thought the way they depicted the shields was really cool. Definitely a huge step up over the 80s movie.
Yeah.
I don't remember what they were like in the sci-fi one.
I liked that they treated them as a regular thing. They didn't do this whole big Harry Potter magic-esque, like, let me point out this awesome shield and everything and how it works. They just do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad they did it like that too. The fights themselves didn't feel like they made a lot of sense. It felt like they tried to make them look cool, but that was it. Especially that one glimpse we had of one of Paul's visions where he sees himself fighting people in the future or whatever, and it just looked goofy. Especially when his visor opens up and you see his face on this CGI body. That was one part where the CGI definitely did not work. And when Duncan Idaho dies, he's fighting Sardaukar, which in the book are described as basically the most feared fighters in the galaxy or the universe or whatever. And in the movie, they just feel like any other troops. They're killing them left and right, which definitely reduced the threat that they posed in the book and made them nowhere near as menacing, which was very disappointing.
And they even tried to build them up in the movie before they actually got to the planet.
Yeah, which, it felt almost pointless because they didn't follow through on it.
They backed off after Duncan killed 2 guys.
Yeah, that was really dumb.
I assume those were Sardaukar, not regular troops.
Yeah, I don't know. They could have been. My favorite part of the movie was the big attack scene, which, again, in the book, you don't even get that scene in the book. You get Paul and Jessica on the ornithopter when they get kidnapped, and then you get other people kind of talking about everything after the fact. But the movie extends it into this big sequence that's kind of the centerpiece of the movie. And again, I thought it was really cool, but it really shows how much more emphasis they put on action over the political maneuverings of everybody.
Right.
Which, again, was disappointing.
It kind of makes me think of episode 4, where before everything turns action-y, there's all those meetings where people are talking about certain people and factions and all that stuff. And as a kid, I remember sitting through those and going, come on, Darth Vader, choke that guy. I don't care what he's talking about.
Yeah. This is definitely not a movie that would appeal to kids, no matter how much action you put in it. At least I don't think so.
Right.
The only other character I want to talk about is Kynes. Kynes in the book is a guy. For no reason, they changed him into a woman in the movie. But the bigger problem is that they completely left the character devoid of character. In the book, that was one of the most interesting characters where you kind of had questions as to what he was really doing. So he's working for the Emperor and is kind of secretly supposed to be plotting against the Atreides, but he's kind of fallen in with the Fremen and he starts liking the Atreides because they're trying to help the Fremen. And again, there's a lot of political maneuvering stuff going on there. And then the Fremen also talk about him almost as like a godlike figure before they actually find out that it's Kynes they're talking about. They talk about Liet, and nobody seems to know who that is, but they think it's a religious figure. In the movie, as soon as the character shows up, they say, this is Dr. Liet Kynes, and none of it ends up mattering. And the character has no personality. You never really get a sense for why she's helping them in the movie. It just kind of happens, and then she dies.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That was pretty disappointing.
I did like the way they portrayed the use of the voice.
Yeah, me too.
I was really wondering how they were going to do that, and I'm glad they came up with a way that worked. And even the way they introduced it into the movie, putting it right at the beginning, I thought was really smart, because that's a scene that's not in the book, and I thought it really worked.
I agree.
And, that's pretty much the only scene in the movie, I think, that's not in the book, other than, again, some of those big action scenes. Everything else, if you describe the actual plot events, is the same as the book. It's just missing all the background and the depth to the characters and their situations. I did think the movie got boring toward the end, and not just because it was long. Once you got to the Fremen, there's nothing to look at anymore. It's all just rocks. So the sense of visual spectacle is gone, which again has been pretty much the focus of the movie up to that point. Then you get the fight between Paul and Jameis, which in the book made sense, but in the movie, the explanation for it is basically just that he doesn't like them and is challenging them. And it from a movie perspective, it felt like they just said, we need a fight at the end of the movie.
I wonder if the second part is going to focus more on the characters now, or still on that big visual aspect.
Yeah, I would hope they focus more on the characters, because otherwise I can't imagine that the ending, for example, would have any kind of impact.
Right.
The central focus of the second half of the book is Paul's struggle to prevent the religious war being waged in his name. And, it's true that doesn't come up until the second half of the book, really. But I can't really imagine that holding a lot of weight in a movie that's a sequel to this part.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the second part turns out.
Yeah. And then my probably my single least favorite thing about the movie was the very last line of the movie where Chani says, "This is only the beginning."
Ugh.
And I was like, oh man, really? That's how you're going to end it? Which, again, that felt like a kind of a mainstream audience kind of thing.
Yeah, I half expected her to say part 2, 2022. Looking right at the camera.
Oh man. I did like the movie, though. I liked it as a movie. Well, I don't know if I liked it as a movie because it didn't, again, the characters were not interesting, the plot was not interesting, but it was the spectacle stuff worked. That's what it focused on, and I did like that.
I agree. I will go see part 2.
Yeah, I would too. I don't know if I'd see it in a theater, though.
I would.
So yeah, it was cool. It was just disappointing coming from the book perspective. But again, if I hadn't read the book, I think I would have liked it even less.
So that's our discussion on Dune.
But this is only the beginning. We will make other videos.